Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to serve as moderator for this morning's symposium, which we've titled Delights and Dilemmas of Booksellers, Librarians, and Private Collectors. It's been such a pleasure getting to know a lot of you over the last couple of days. At 104 years of age, the Book Club of California is the oldest bibliophilic organization in California, and in fulfilling our mission to promote the love of the book, we've always sought to foster collegial relationships with like-minded organizations. So we're thrilled to have been able to host the FABS tour for the second time. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd like to just briefly explain the format for this morning's symposium. We'll hear 10 to 15-minute talks from each of our 5 panelists, after which I get to use my moderator's privilege to propose a few questions of my own to the panel. Now, while I'm presenting my questions, you'll have the opportunity to write down any questions that you may have on the question sheets that are on the table, and then a volunteer will come around and collect those. And I'll read aloud a selection of your questions, all of them time permitting. We'll plan to adjourn the formal portion of the symposium promptly at 11:30 so that you have plenty of time to eat your lunch and prepare for the rest of the day's activities. And at that time, you'll probably have an opportunity to mingle and ask any further questions that you might have of our terrific panel. Today's symposium is being recorded, and it will be available to replay on the Book Club's YouTube channel. So you needn't feel the need to take furious notes unless that's something that you like to do. And there may be portions or the entire excerpts from some of these talks reprinted in the club's quarterly newsletter as well. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers, which I'll do all at once in order of their speaking assignments. So I just ask you to hold your applause until I'm through with all the introductions. Ken Carmiel has been an antiquarian bookseller for over 40 years. He earned his master's degree in library and information sciences from UCLA and is a member of or advisor to numerous bibliophilic and educational institutions, including the Zamorano, Roxborough, and Grolier clubs, the UCLA and UCSB libraries, and the William Andrews Clark Library, and the California Rare Book School. Ken is also a current board member of the Book Club of California and chairman of its development committee. Gary Kurutz is a librarian and noted scholar of California and Western history, and he currently serves as the principal librarian emeritus of the Special Collections Branch at the California State Library in Sacramento. Gary earned master's degrees in history and library science, respectively, from UCSD and USC, and served as past president of the Book Club of California and as chair of the club's publications committee for nearly 20 years. Dr. Andrew Nadell is a psychiatrist in private practice who earned his Doctor of Medicine degree from Duke University.
And he's just arriving.
Terrific. Dr. Nadell is a noted collector of early books and manuscripts on the learned professions and skilled trades, and a member of numerous bibliophilic societies, including the Grolier Club, the Association Internationale de Bibliophilie, and the Société Royale des Bibliophiles et Iconophiles de Belgique. And his alma mater, Duke University, has created the Andrew T. Nadell Book Collectors Contest to promote and recognize young collectors. Dr. Susan Allen is a distinguished educator and librarian who currently serves as director of the California Rare Book School. She earned her PhD in library and information sciences from UCLA, as well as master's degrees from St. John's College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is an expert on the history of the book and teaches regularly at the California Rare Book School. Dr. Allen also serves as treasurer of the Zamorano Club of Los Angeles. And David Levy, who is now retired from a successful career in the financial services industry, has been a book collector since age 12. David is a noted scholar of books on gaming, with a particular focus on the English author Edmund Hoyle. His research on Hoyle has been published in bibliographical journals and on his blog, Edmund Hoyle Gent, and much of his descriptive bibliography of Hoyle is available online. His early collection of Hoyles is second only in breadth to the Bodleian Library. David is a member of the Roxborough Club of San Francisco and a current board member of the Book Club of California. Please give all of our speakers a warm welcome.
Thank you, Randy. I'll take my glasses off. My remarks are based on being an active California rare book dealer over the past 40 years. Well, even longer, because as I sold my first book in 1967 as a junior in college at UC Santa Barbara, selling books to the UC Santa Barbara Library. I opened up a store on Westwood Boulevard down the road from UCLA in 1976. I can assure you that my rare book business is alive and well today. In fact, last year, and so far this half of 2016, have been exceptional. But you have to understand that being in business for this length of time has many cumulative benefits. I now know many of the private collectors, some quite well. I know many of the libraries that are active in building rare book and special collections, and know many of the librarians well, some for decades. I certainly know just about everyone in the antiquarian book trade. So I'm sitting on a very comfortable perch. I don't think it would be quite as comfortable for someone just starting out as a rare book dealer today. The rare book business revolves around two basic activities, buying and selling. And I'll be making some comments about both of these topics. First, selling. I'm going to start with a profound book truth that I've learned over the years. Selling a book is easy if you buy the right book at the right price. I said it was profound. If you are buying intelligently and selectively and are able to price your books competitively, selling is really pretty easy. There are three categories of buyers. Institutional, that's the libraries, of course, private collectors, and dealers, and all are alive and well in California. Libraries such as Cal and UCLA and many of the UCs are active buyers, but are dependent today on private endowments and gifts much more than state funds. Stanford, the Huntington Library, the Getty, and even the evil USC. I'm a UCLA guy, are quite active. They're all quite active. And perhaps surprisingly, many of the smaller schools are showing more activity building special collections today than previously. In Southern California, Loyola University, Azusa Pacific, Chapman University, some may not know about this, but Chapman received the estate of Huell Hauser of the California Gold TV series fame, and it has benefited their library greatly. And Cal State Dominguez Hills, they've all purchased books from me in recent years. Selling to private collectors remains strong. They're collectors at every income level, and I usually see a few new faces every year that start to form serious collections spending serious money. With a population of over 39 million people, California has the greatest concentration of wealth in America. I know collectors of early printed books, medieval manuscripts, important illustrated books, English literature, printing history, titles listed in standard reference books such as Printing in the Mind of Man or Bernd Dibner's Heralds of Science, books on wine, or even the writings of Edmund Hoyle, the collecting interest of my fellow panelist David Levy. Just to name a few areas of collecting interest, they're all here in California. My business is quite active in selling to the trade. I've always been a generalist, handling books on all subjects, in all languages, and all periods of printed history, but with a strong emphasis on books printed before the year 1800. The truth is that I'll buy anything that I think I can sell for a profit. Of course, my thinking has not always been right, and some of those potentially profitable purchases have become old friends. I see them every day, some for many years. As a generalist, I've structured my business quite consciously to have prices attractive to specialist dealers, choosing to take a smaller profit but a more active turnover of my inventory. I've been known to sell John Crichton, a few 18th century English books, and I've even sold a few Blake items to John Windle over the years. I enjoy selling the right book to the right collector, library, or dealer. It's one of the pleasures of this business for me. So let's move on to buying books. I'm now going to state my second profound book truth. You have to buy a book before you can sell a book. And definitely, buying books is my biggest business challenge today. Regularly finding interesting and affordable material to buy is my greatest dilemma. I've always purchased a great deal of my stock from the trade. 25 years ago, I would guess that 60% of my total purchases came from other dealers. Today, I would guess it's no more than 25 or 30%. 25 years ago, there was a used or rare book shop in almost every small city in the United States and dozens in large cities. No more. We're all aware of the loss of so many brick and mortar shops all over the country. I still will occasionally go out to visit one of my colleagues in Southern California, perhaps to one of the few remaining retail shops, or to a dealer that works out of an office or their home. But it's not like the old days when I'd get in my car on a Saturday and visit 6 or 8 shops, talking to the booksellers, handling a lot of books, and buying quite a few. In addition to the loss of so many stores, we all have to deal with the new book pricing realities brought about by the internet, which has resulted in my buying much less from my trade colleagues. The internet provides an amazing amount of information, and it is immediately available to anyone with a computer. My accumulated book knowledge that used to make me money because I knew something that another dealer didn't know, is now shared with the world. Most dealers immediately look up everything they buy to see the available copies currently found online and their prices, and based on that information, price their acquisitions accordingly, frequently not leaving room for another dealer to be able to consider buying it. For instance, in the past, that general used bookshop owner who paid $100 for a particular book might have been quite happy to quickly sell it to another dealer for $200. Today, now they see that the least expensive copy online is priced $400, so they make their copy $375. This kind of internet-driven pricing is pervasive, making it so much harder to find things for me to buy at book fairs, in dealer catalogs, or in the remaining shops. Nevertheless, the internet can also be a source for buying, particularly antiquarian titles where there are very few copies in the marketplace. Today, I regularly check online inventories of other booksellers. Once I learn that a particular dealer has some early printed books in their stock and list their inventory on the ABE, Advanced Book Exchange website, I'll go to their inventory by clicking on Booksellers at the top of the page, enter the dealer's name, click on that, and then go to the advanced search feature on their page and fill in the fields for published date with something like 1460 to 1800, just to see what books might turn up. I do occasionally find some things to buy, but it's a time-consuming process and kind of boring. It certainly isn't the same experience as examining the book in hand and talking to the dealer. I now mainly depend on buying privately from collectors that I know or their heirs or estates. Also, another benefit of being in business a long time is getting referrals to a collection for sale from private collectors or libraries in Southern California, particularly for me, the Huntington, UCLA, and the Getty, and even other dealers if the books don't fall within their particular area of interest. Also, in recent years, I've been able to purchase a number of good collections in partnership with another dealer. Many dealers are not involved in the antiquarian end of the business, let's say Continental books printed before 1800, but they may be given an opportunity to buy such a collection and they smell a potential profit to be made. Rather than pass up the books, they have wisely called me. We put our heads together, make an offer, and the books are purchased 50-50. In exchange for bringing me into the deal, I usually do all of the work, producing an inventory list, cataloging the books, all of the merchandising, and all of the bookkeeping, just sending my partner monthly checks as the books are sold. So far, all of my partners have been very happy, no lawsuits to date. I've never purchased a great deal of my inventory from auctions, but I'm now looking regularly at online auction sales and buying occasionally. But with the present-day auction structure of a 20 or 25% buyer's premium on top of the hammer price, it can be hard for me to buy what I would like to buy. Also, the great success of the auction houses to attract rare book collections today. Again, this success is due to their fee structure, usually offering the seller 85 to 95% or even 100% of the hammer price for particularly important or valuable books. This has taken away many buying opportunities from the trade. So I oftentimes find myself sitting in my office wanting to spend some money, but frustrated that I don't have any place to spend it. But please don't feel sorry for me. I'm doing fine. I still enjoy the rare book business very much, although it isn't quite as fun as it was 25 years ago, I'm sorry to say. I may have to work a little harder finding the right material, but I still manage to regularly turn up interesting books and find them good homes. Thank you.
Around here without disgracing myself. And first of all, I wanted to thank Randy for coordinating all of this. This is love getting your emails, and you gave us great hope and inspiration and kept us calm, and you really appreciate that. Also want to say hello to my good friend Oscar Lewis, who was the spiritual head of the Book Club of California. And when I had the good fortune of being on the board and then president and chair of the publications committee, he was always there. And he's such a great author, and he offered such good, kind advice. And I just always love coming into this room to see this photograph. But I'm a specialist in California and Western history, so that's what I'm going to talk about, oddly enough. And one of the great pinnacles of collecting in this field is the Zamorano 80. And some of you I know are from out of state here. You may not know about this, but this is the Mount Everest of collecting in California history. And it is not the rarest books, as the early members of the Zamorano Club said. It is the most distinguished books. And it is, I think, in my opinion, the finest work ever created by a committee. And in so doing, they created a thoroughbred and not a camel. And it just is amazing what they were able to do. And they had a number of scholars way back in the 1940s getting together. And how can we make a contribution to the collecting and development of libraries, and people wanting to know what are the most important and valuable books on California history. So these distinguished bibliogents would get together over a little glass of sherry and get some inspiration from that. And there's a guy by the name of Homer Crotty who coordinated all of this, a wonderful collector, and Robert Cowan, a great bibliographer, and Henry R. Wagner, and on and on and on. And Leslie Bliss, the librarian at the Huntington Library, all got together and formulated this. And what the great thing about the Zamorano 80, too, is that it's had such a great influence not only on California book collecting, but also on book collecting in Western Americana. And I brought a few examples along, and just to show you, too, one is the Arizona 50. You have the Alaska 67. Now you have another one, the Arizona 100, and the Washington 89. And they all say we derived inspiration from the Zamorano 80. So California had an influence beyond its borders. And again, this is such a great field to collect in. However, reality being such, Ken, you're talking about the scarcity of books and getting good materials. This is now an unachievable goal to reach. I'll never forget, I used to work in the rare book department at the Huntington Library during the age of parchment and medieval manuscripts, and long before the internet. And my boss, Carrie Bless, would always scowl. And he said, as that Henry Wagner, he had that one title. And because of that, we will never have a complete Zamorano 80 collection at the Huntington Library. And that was Zamorano 80 number 64, which is John Roland Ridge's Life and Adventures of Joaquin Murrieta, the great California outlaw. And that was very, very scarce. Henry Wagner owned a copy. It went up for auction, and it was purchased by Fritz Beinecke, and who, again, donated it to a certain institution at Yale University in New Haven called the Beinecke Library. And that is the only institution in the world that has a complete collection of all 80 in first edition. But it just goes to show you how scarce some of these things could be, and some people would say that was just a contrived title. But nonetheless, John Roland Ridge was a very important author. He was the first Native American-born novelist, and also the first Native-born author, actually. And he was half Cherokee, half white, and he came out after his father was murdered in Georgia after negotiating a treaty with the Great White Father, and came west with his mother, and became a journalist, and did very, very well, and wrote this book up. But the trouble is, once it got published, they all got burnt except for 3 copies. Another edition came out, and somebody else burnt these up. So it was very frustrating. So that's why you're always going to be frustrated in trying to get this. But in my good fortune as a librarian, and I've had the pleasure, I've kind of mixed helping book dealers with writing entries. And the first great collector I encountered in the Zamorano 80 field was a man by the name of Henry Clifford down in Los Angeles. And I used to work at the California Historical Society on was their head librarian, and he was on our board of directors. And I thought, this is a fascinating man, because he not only was a great book collector, but he collected gold. And he used to run ads in our quarterly saying, "Wanted gold bullion." And I thought, that's pretty curious. But well, if you can do it, great. And so I started to get to know him a little bit better, and I went down to visit his beautiful home in the Arroyo Seco area of Pasadena, overlooking where the Rose Bowl is. And I was blown away by his collection, just stacks and stacks of material. I thought, this guy is a serious collector. And he was an investment counselor, but he fell in love with California and the West, and he started collecting postal covers from the gold rush. And then he decided, he's actually, as a kid, like so many of us, started out as a stamp collector. And he said, these postal covers are really rare. And he is right. You have to pay a very dear price for these little envelopes sent out during the gold rush time period. And then he got involved in another area of collecting gold coins, all having to be minted here in California. And we have the old mint not too far from this location here. And then he said, to know more about the gold rush, I guess I better buy some books. And so he started reading and buying more and more books. And then he joined the Zamorano Club and heard about the Zamorano 80, which was published in 1948. And so he decided, okay, I'll do that. And through various auctions, he was able to collect all 80. And then when he went to the big bookstore in the sky, Dorothy Sloan contacted me and said she's a wonderful auctioneer, a graduate of John Howell Books here in San Francisco, but she went back to her native Texas and started her own auction business. And she said, I've got the contract now to auction Henry Clifford's great collection. But he also had the most complete collection of California pictorial letter sheets. And letter sheets were the early form of California stationery. They all had a scene on them of a mining camp or people mining, and they're very, very rare. And most of them were intended to write a letter home on, but most people kept those as keepsakes. And some people would say that they're the precursor of the postcard. And I said, Dorothy, I'll be happy to do that. as long as I can have access to Henry's collection, because I'm working on a little project called the California Gold Rush, a Descriptive Bibliography. And I said, could I have access to Henry's collection? And she said, you bet. So I flew down from Sacramento to Pasadena, and she rented out an apartment there. This was an interesting insight for me to see how you would handle a collection like this. And so she rented an apartment on Marengo Avenue, and I walked in and had all these piles of books and things. And she also had a lot of photographic equipment there. And she said, and this is one of the highlights of my life, she said, would you like to see the Zamorano 80? And I said, you better believe it. And so she took me down a hallway and opened up the linen closet. And there they all were. And I bowed down. I said, I've arrived. This is just so fabulous. This is so fabulous. But, and so, I was able to go through those. And, but what I even enjoyed more, too, was I opened up a couple of shoe boxes. And again, I found the very rare, even more rare than the first edition of Felix Wiersbicky's California as It Is and As It May Be, which is a great promotional work about California. And it's the first book about California printed in the English language. And printed in California as well, so it has that distinction. So, and he also had the very rare and only known copy of that same title printed in Tasmania, of all places. Again, bringing Australians to the California Gold Rush. So that was very exciting. So I wrote up a description of his letter sheet catalog, and Dorothy never spared expenses. She produced a gorgeous folio-sized catalog, and it was just incredible. But again, a wonderful highlight was to go to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where the auction was to take place. And I have here a catalog of the Clifford sale of the Zamorano 80, and I went through it the other night, and I have all my own markings of who was bidding there. And of course, I got to know, in the meantime, another wonderful collector by the name of Dan Volkman, who lives here in San Francisco, or lived here. He's gone again to the big library in the sky. And when I was working on my California Gold Rush bibliography, he said, sure, come on over to my house. And he had this most gorgeous mansion in overlooking the Golden Gate, 3-story home, and all his books beautifully lined up. I always thought he would be a perfect Roman senator. He was so regal in his bearing, but he always wore Brooks Brothers clothes, that sort of thing. Had a Jaguar in the driveway, perfect San Francisco gentleman. But he let me have at it, and spent a day and a half there. He even provided me with lunch. So when the Clifford collection came up, and he said, I'm going to attempt to complete my Zamorano 80 collection. And he comes from a distinguished California family, both from his mother's side and from his father's side. And both came here during the Gold Rush era. And he was an architect, but that's what really interested him. It was his family heritage, and that's why he got into collecting in this field. Also, he is a superb collector of Allen and Grabhorn Press books. But anyhow, one of the great moments there was to go to the auction of the Zamorano 80, and we all knew what was going to happen there. And I'll never forget, I had my little seat in the back because I was not going to be a bidder at that. And he strode in, he looked just so regal, and sat down up in the front row, and he had paddle number 13. Brought him some good luck. And so when the number 64, the John Rowland Ridge, came up, he put up his paddle, and no one else did. And so everyone knew that he was going to get it and complete his collection. They didn't want to outbid him, so he got it for a mere $80,000, so not too bad. But anyhow, so again, as I mentioned before, Dan went to his reward, and so Dorothy was commissioned. No, I take it back. He was still alive. I got out of order there, got ahead of myself. Dan decided to auction off his Zamorano 80 collection and his California history books. And so Dorothy contacted me and said, gee, I'd like to do an updated Zamorano 80. Could you help me out? And I said, oh, sure. And I said, this was in August, and I said, I bet the auction will be in February in time for the Antiquarian Book Fair here in San Francisco. And she said, yes, it will be, and you have to have everything done by Halloween. And I said, how about Thanksgiving? No, it's got to be Halloween. So anyhow, I said, okay. And so I hemmed and hawed and said, yes, I'll do it. It'd be a good, fun thing to do at night. And for all those months, my wife only saw the back of my head. But it was so much fun to work with Dorothy on writing entries, but I also realized that I did not feel expert enough to write about the Spanish-Mexican time period, so I contacted a good friend of mine, W. Michael Mathis, a great scholar in that field, and he agreed to do this, and Dorothy said, yes, by all means. So I simplified my task. I only had to write 61 out of the 80 entries. And so it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it, and it was so much pleasure in just writing up something new. Because one of my fears was, gee, Dorothy, you did a really nice job with the Clifford collection, and you also did a nice job with these other auctions. Why not just use that? And he said, no, I want something new. So I spent many, many, many evening hours, Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, all that sort of thing, working on this project. And it was a great fulfillment, and I brought along this. I was very pleased, if I can dig it out here. This was my copy of the Zamorano 80, so it's, and I'm very proud of this. Dan Volkman himself had, I think, 10 copies specially bound in cloth, and he had my name gold stamped on it, so I felt very privileged. And he was such a nice gentleman, and that auction did very, very well. And the number 64, however, was brought by a private collector, and so we don't know where that is. Maybe there's hope out there for somebody else. So but anyhow, that was a great thrill. But over the years, there's always been a discussion too. We got to update the Zamorano 80. And, it just, some people would say, well, that was an artificial list. How can you boil thousands and thousands of California history books down to 80 books? But nonetheless, people said, no, this is an important contribution. I'll never forget, too, Lawrence Clark Powell, the great librarian from UCLA, the Powell Library is named in his honor, was on at a conference, ALA conference in Boston, Massachusetts, and he went into a bookstore and said, I lack a first edition of Gertrude Atherton's Splendid Idle 40s, which is Zamorano 80, number 1. And the dealer said, oh, that's that damn book that some collectors out there in Los Angeles formed this list. And he said, it's, only a jackass would follow a list like that. So, but he said, do you still have it? And he said, yes. And he said, but people don't read these books. They just follow it because it's on a list. And so anyhow, over the years, there was an endless debate about doing an updated edition. And I might say, too, when they originally started out, they said, let's do the Zamorano 100. And they agreed that it had to be unanimous choice. Well, again, that's like herding cats. They have all these experts. So it was decided that let's just do 80. We can get a unanimous decision on that. So, as I mentioned, if you read through the wonderful newsletter of the Zamorano Club, Oja Volante, or the Flying Sheet, all these discussions. And finally, in the group of Zamoranans got together and said, we're going to do something. And it was headed up by Larry Burgess over at the Smiley Library and Alan Jutzy at the Huntington, a couple of others. And they said, we're going to do it. But there were still some hard feelings. Some people had titles that they said they have to have in there. And one of them was a good friend of mine, Victoria Daly, and she had a wonderful idea of having got to represent California popular culture. So she said, one of the most important books is Gidget, the little girl with big ideas, that great book about surfing culture, made famous by Sally Field and others. And the Gidget, that's one of my favorite books. It was written by Mr. Kohner, who wrote this novel by eavesdropping on his daughter's telephone conversations. You wouldn't be able to do that anymore in this age of iPhones and what have you. But anyhow, unfortunately, Gidget did not make the final cut. But the Zamorano Club did issue Zamorano Select, 120 books, and they asked me to write the introduction for it. I consider that to be a great honor, and that came out, and it's a great guide to current California history, because so often if you're in the library business, even in this day and age of Google Books and HathiTrust and what have you, people still say, can you recommend some good books on California history? And the Zamorano Select is a lovely, lovely contribution. So anyhow, if I exceeded my time, right on time. So anyhow, I've had a lot of fun. And just in case you don't know, Zamorano, it was named for Augustin V. Zamorano, who was California's very first printer. And he published the first book printed in California in 1853, Governor Figueroa's Manifesto, a defense of his administration. Nothing has changed in politics, I think. So anyhow, at the end, if you want to come up and look at some of these things, I'd be more than happy to share them with you. Thank you so much for your patience. I'll try not to spill anything.
Well, first, before talking about myself, collectors talk about themselves an awful lot. I wanted to start by paying tribute to Dr. Ann Smith, who organized the FABS Symposium, who was the president of the Book Club of California, and really has done a terrific job in a difficult situation, because it's hard to do this in San Francisco because of the current economy. And she's done a wonderful job, and she's we haven't been able to come with you, but I hear from everyone that it was a terrific symposium. So here's to Dr. Ann Smith. She was also generous enough to include me in this company. And one thing I should say is that the two previous speakers have already said most of what I have to say, especially Ken Carmiel's comment on book selling and effectively about book buying. And of course, no one can compare to Gary Kurutz in this state on the book in California. However, the original subject of this was collecting and books in California. And I have to admit that as a book collector, I do not collect in California. And indeed, as Ken has said to you, no one, no bibliomaniac, no bibliophile in the world collects locally anymore. If they do collect locally, they're going to have a very different collection than if they use the internet. There really is no exclusively local market, and there really is no local scarcity. When I first came to California over 40 years ago, I was actually collecting in California, even though I already knew many booksellers around this country and in Britain and in Europe. We had here in this state a truly exceptional group of booksellers of worldwide distinction, and that included Bernard Rosenthal, perhaps first among them, and also Warren Howell and Jake Zeitlin, and in Los Angeles a man named Harry Levinson. Their catalogs went everywhere throughout the world, as in fact do the catalogs of similar distinguished booksellers here in California still do. But it was possible to visit them and to browse their stock and to see books that were not otherwise available. This is the same phenomenon that Ken referred to when he talked about open bookshops. Actually, Levinson's was not an open bookshop, and Rosenthal's was at that time. But the most important difference, the key thing which has changed book collecting, bibliophily, bibliomania, all of the things that concern us, the most important difference is the internet. It has changed not only the world of rare books, but it has changed the whole world. And the list of websites that I'm recommending to you shows you how you access the whole world. I collect in two areas. I have a principal collection, which is books and manuscripts on occupations and professions and skilled trades. It's an expansion of my original collection, which was on the profession of medicine. And I felt at one time that medicine was too narrow. that is, medical politics and medical education and medical students, and quackery was too narrow. And I had two choices where I would go next. One is I could go where my predecessors have gone, that is, the science of medicine and the therapeutics of medicine. And of course, in living here in San Francisco, the greatest collector, perhaps the single greatest collector of the 20th century, was Haskell Norman in the fields of medicine and science. And when one looked at the things he had, which I did in 1985, he actually invited the International Bibliophiles to visit his home in Ross, on the very top of the hill in Ross. And when you saw the books, when everyone who came from around the world saw the books he had, it really made it difficult to imagine collecting in that area. And in fact, the great collectors of medical books and science books now, the living collectors, do not collect everything. They collect very narrow pieces of that. I have a very good friend who collects only Vesalius and related 16th century books. I have another friend who collects cardiology, but only cardiology and related books. Whereas Haskell Norman collected everything, the greatest books in medicine, and by extension, the greatest books in science. So the choice I had was to go ahead and collect some area of medicine, therapeutics and science, in addition to books on doctors, or to expand in some other way. And I had taken a degree in the sociology of medicine in England while I was a medical student at Duke. And the sociology of medicine in England, not in this country, but in England in the 1970s, was the sociology of social structure. That is, it was where did doctors fit in, how were they regulated, and where they stood among other professions. And so that's where I decided to go. I decided to collect professions, occupations. And the nice thing about collecting a subject, which is, as my wife frequently says, is too broad, is that one can pick and choose. And one can collect early books. One can collect medieval and even pre-medieval documents and manuscripts. One can collect incunables. One can collect 16th century books. One can collect illustrated books. There's a whole wide range. And one is allowed to choose. And part of the passion of book collecting, at least the bibliomaniacal kind, is making the choice, picking and choosing, deciding what one wants. Now, with no disrespect to my most distinguished colleague, Gary Kurutz, a list is not for me. And I understand that very, very good friends of mine, like Dan Volkman, did collect by list, but I can't do that. And in fact, in my other collection, I didn't buy a whole collection. I'll get to that in a minute, for that reason. So I collect professions, and I mostly collect early books, and I collect manuscripts. And I can consider the world of manuscripts to go well into the early modern period. I know a lot of people only collect illuminations or text manuscripts before the invention of printing, but I collect modern ones as well. Modern meaning up to about either 1700 or perhaps 1789. So that is a little different. It does give me a certain chance to buy things that are not highly collected. I would, by the way, for the librarians around here, I think modern manuscripts, that is to say early modern manuscripts and even modern manuscripts accepting literature, are underpriced. The other collection that I have was inspired by my wife, Eleanor Ramsey, who is here today, and that is a large collection, a very large collection of mostly 19th, some 18th century books on art and architecture of the Gothic Revival. Unfortunately, being a natural-born collector who was collecting baseball cards and superhero comic books when he was 8 years old, the collecting spreads. So the original intention was that we would collect the books in original bindings, preferably. We would collect the manuscripts for the books, which are astonishingly available one every year or two. We would collect bindings, that is Gothic Revival bindings in the taste of the period, which is especially French and English. But it got out of hand. And so instead of collecting just books and book bindings and manuscripts, we also collect silver and glass, and base metals, especially French brass and bronze. We collect pictures, drawings, paintings, watercolors, but worst of all, and I warn you, worst of all, we collect furniture. The problem with collecting furniture is that it takes up a lot of room. Each piece takes up as many as 100 books would take up. So it's very difficult. So what we had to do was buy a great big house and it's already full. So let's go back, as a psychiatrist, let's go back and look at bibliomania as a disease. It's not really a disease. It is not a psychiatric diagnosis. Some people use phrases taken from the psychiatric literature to describe it, but it's not really describable in those terms. The reason it's not describable, even though it is incurable, is because it is so pleasurable. And disease implies dysphoria. And book collecting is not dysphoric, it's delightful. It also, unlike other diseases, it causes no harm to anyone except perhaps financial harm. And the afflicted individual is certainly not harmed. And I would like to say that even though the internet has changed collecting, it hasn't changed bibliomania. And if you want to read about bibliomania, you should read Werner Münsterberger's book, which is really fantastic, Collecting an Unruly Passion. It is entirely insulting. You will not be flattered, but it is fascinating. So book collecting, which is the book version of collecting, does go all the way back to the beginning of human beings. The internet, as my predecessors today have said, have changed the way people collect because it changed what people know. Everyone knows the same things. There are very few secrets. In an introduction to a catalog of a very distinguished French bookseller's stock, which was sold about 2 weeks ago in Paris, the expert for the sale, the expert who cataloged the sale for the auctioneers are called commissaires-priseurs, and the expert wrote with great admiration for the bookseller whose stock he was selling, or whose private collection he was selling. And he spoke about discretion, which means the same thing in French. And the whole idea of discretion doesn't exist, because everybody knows everything. Everyone knows where the books were sold, especially if it was at auction, but also, if you look on rarebookhub.com, you can see many booksellers' catalogs are now online. So you can find out where people bought, even if they bought from a bookseller. And that is, a bookseller who has already sold the book. The catalog is now online. So the idea of discretion that the French prized so much and kept secrets from each other, one bookseller from another, one collector from another, even the greatest living book collector, people know where he gets his books, because once they know he has a book, they can look it up online and find out where he bought it. And he is very discreet. So the result is we all know everything, and there are only a few kinds of booksellers, which include my friend Ken, who can make a go of it. And it includes people like Ken, who are scholarly booksellers, who know more about the book than I do or that other collectors do. And they create value by their description, by their discovering the relevance and importance of the book. And then, and also those booksellers generally have the kind of contacts Ken spoke about, where they get books privately, which is, of course, the best thing to do. The other kind of booksellers you can buy from are those few booksellers remaining who don't use the internet and don't know what they have. And I bought a book supposedly defective from a Spanish bookseller, a small Spanish bookseller, just last year, in which she said that it was lacking the final leaf. But in fact, there is no final leaf. And the way I found that out was looking at the copy on the Bibliothèque Nationale and also the copy in the British Library. So I have to, even though I buy a lot of books from booksellers, I do buy from auction houses. I buy a lot from auction houses. And the bidding, the experience of bidding has always been, for me, very much a high. It feeds the bibliomania. When you're bidding and you win, you've really, really got the book. And the sense of conquest is very important. On the other hand, if you get outbid and you wimp out, you feel terrible. Just terrible. Now, it used to be, when I was young, that the sense of conquest also came from the arrival of booksellers' catalogs in the mail. But then, if you called right away and you didn't get the book because it was sold, at least it wasn't your fault. It was the fault of the post office for taking so long to bring the catalog. Now, there were some dealers, especially in England, who staggered their mailings in an attempt to allow everyone to receive the catalog at about the same time. So I had English dealers I knew who claimed that they were sending their catalogs out to me before they posted the catalogs within Great Britain. I hope that was true, and sometimes it seemed it was. So the list of websites that I brought for you, I think will help you if you want to be a book collector or are already a book collector. And the two of those websites actually are owned by people in San Francisco. RareBookHub.com is owned by our fellow book club and Roxburgh Club and Grolier Club member, Bruce McKinney. And Archive.net is owned by Brewster Calley, who's not here today, but who he and his wife are very involved in our world. And Mary Austin. And so he owns Archive.net. So there are two of these great, of the privately held ones, two of them are owned by Californians. So the, I should say, by the way, that I still have a huge reference library, bookcases full of reference books, and I like them better, oddly. I like to hold them, I like to open them, I like to browse through them, which you can't do online in the same way. So I prefer, if I can, to use my own reference books. On the other hand, the ones online can be searched without having to instantly searched. So the place I start, let's say there's a book coming up for auction, or there's a book in a bookseller's catalog, or a privately offered book, which I'm pleased to say I still get. And the first thing you do is you look at rarebookhub.com. It records all the book auction records, past and present. They're moving back in time. And it gives you a real sense of the rarity of the book and in some sense of its value. Then the next thing to do is to look at the book online. And oddly enough, you can read almost any printed book online now. We're talking about early printed books. Obviously, they haven't finished the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. But for old books, you can look at it online, and you can use any of these websites. If it's an English book, it's surely on the British Library website, which has improved its access greatly this year. If it's an incunable, you can use the SDC. If it's a French book, or many continental books which are not French, the Bibliothèque Nationale. And of course, the Bayer Staatsbibliothek is absolutely indispensable for early printed books up to 1600, because they have a tremendously important library, and they put most of them online, and it's a marvelous resource. And then for Spanish books and books published in Spanish in other countries, the Biblioteca Nacional de España is absolutely fantastic, and surprisingly so. A huge amount of money must have gone into that website. So then you can read the book, and you can see if it fits in your subject or not. And then you can decide where you go with it. So you have a sense of what it's worth, you have a sense of its content, you even know what it looks like, and you may even, in some of these websites, actually see the book binding. Most of them now do the binding, as well as the book. So you know what kind of binding may have been put on it, assuming it wasn't done too recently. So, and one more caveat before I end. When you are doing all of this, looking at an auction thing, you still have to check vialibri.net or Adol, preferably Via Libri, which is fantastic. Also owned by an American, although I think he lives in England or France. And the Via Libri tells you, as much as any single meta search engine, all the books for sale in the world. And very often I have found that booksellers have copies, better condition, association copies, better binding than the auction copy. And you can buy the bookseller copy before the auction, and you're finished with it. So you've used the auction catalog to buy a book without the auction getting any benefit, but also allowing you to have the copy, which is the main goal. So I wish you all luck in the book hunt. It is one of the best sports in the world, and I hope that there are enough copies of this for everyone who wants one, and if not, we could run some more for you. And thank you very much.
I had further to walk up here than anyone else, and I think David's going to have the hardest time getting up here. But thank you very much, Randy, for organizing this panel, and it's triggered some memories for me. And thank you, Anne, for this wonderful FABS experience, and Jennifer Sims, I'm not sure where she is at this point, but, oh, all right, I see your hand. Thank you so much for having us here in the Book Club of California. My name is Susan Allen. I'm director of California Rare Book School, and I've counted on the Book Club of California being here, I think, since the late 1980s when I first discovered it in a smaller facility behind us on this floor. And I've had the delight to watch it grow to this wonderful facility over the years. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Anyway, I'm delighted to be a part of this panel that is sharing with you delights and dilemmas of booksellers, librarians, private collectors. I think I'm the librarian on this panel. I did work for many, many years as a rare books and special collections librarian and a library director. I've chosen, as I retired in 2011 from full-time work as a librarian, to spend my years when I can actually choose everything I want to do to be director of California Rare Book School, because it's been a place where I felt like I could give back to the whole community in a special way. And I would like to greet some of the students that are here today from California Rare Book School, Anne being one of them, and some of the faculty. Gary Kurutz has been a faculty member for California Rare Book School from the very beginning. I think he was one of the very first teachers for California Rare Book School, and he continues to be on our faculty, and we'll be looking forward to his course again this year. But let me tell you about the delights and a little bit about the program and how it came to be. In the early part of this century, 2001, 2002, there was an exhibition in Los Angeles called The World from Here. I don't know if any in this audience have known of it. There was a beautiful catalog that was produced to go along with that exhibition. And it had been created by librarians, special collections librarians throughout the county of Los Angeles, that had been meeting regularly for about 2 or 3 years to plan what would be the first museum-style exhibition in Los Angeles. And it culminated with this exhibition taking place at the Hammer Museum in Westwood, California, from December 2001 to January 2002. And as I say, the catalog is out there, and so if you're curious to know what was in California, what was in Los Angeles, and what we saw of as being the world being right there at our feet in Los Angeles, you can find this catalog. At any rate, after we had done this momentous thing, and we felt very good, and we patted ourselves on the back for this wonderful exhibition that had been so successful, we kind of looked around at each other and said, well, what can we do next? And we liked meeting, so we kept meeting. We would have coffee and go out for lunch and that sort of thing. And there was discussion about a rare book school at that point, a rare book school that would be on the West Coast. And then if I can speak more formally from some remarks I have. In November 2004, which would have been about 2 years after that exhibition took place, Stakeholders, those of us that had been involved in this earlier exhibition effort, but stakeholders in the rare book community in Southern California met and agreed to form an informal consortium to establish a program supporting the training of rare book and archives professionals in California and the West. Attendees were guided by findings of a feasibility study that had been carried out in 2002, and this feasibility study had been carried out under the auspices of the California Center for the Book that was headed by Sid Berger at the time. The feasibility study concluded that there were ample institutional resources and special collections in California to justify having a continuing education program in the state offering courses in rare books, special collections, and archives. People attending the 2004 organizational meeting were Bruce Whiteman from the Clark Library at UCLA, Peter Ryle, who was then from the Center of 17th and 18th Century Studies at UCLA, David Zeidberg and Laura Stalker from the Huntington Library, Linda Clausen from the University of California, San Diego, myself, and at the time I was at the Getty Research Institute as Chief Librarian and Associate Director. Carol Sandberg and Michael Thompson were there from Michael Thompson Rare Books. Mark Russa from Pepperdine University was there. Beverly Lynch from the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA was there. Those not able to attend were from USC and also Gary Strong from UCLA at that time, Roy Ritchie also from the Huntington. And then it was deemed important to include other local institutions in the Southern California at that time. So shortly thereafter, we had representation from Occidental College and the Claremont colleges, and additional booksellers. Ken Carmiel was one of the additional booksellers that came on board very early on to help with this program. And then the most important thing that happened early on was that it was agreed that Beverly Lynch, Professor, Department of Information Studies, and Director of the UCLA Senior Fellows Program, would serve as the school's founding director. And with that, things were off the ground and running, and I believe the first courses were offered in 2006. There were just 4 or 5 courses that were offered that year, but Gary's stellar history of the book in the West was offered that very first year. So who attends California Rare Book School? It's quite a wonderful group, and what I'll do is I have a notebook here that has a lot of photographs, so I'm just going to put it out. And you can take a look at it. The attendees are of all ages. I think we have had young people as young as undergraduates that have attended some of our courses, and then we have had retirees attend our courses, and everything in between. We've had librarians, we've had collectors, we've had booksellers, we've had graduate students, both in library science and in history and literature and art history, you name it. Anyone that is interested in the kinds of courses that we offer is welcome to apply, and the instructors make the decisions about who to admit to their courses. And we've had really just a wonderful student body that comes from all demographic areas, and at this point, above and beyond just Southern California. During the first 6 years, funding and in-kind support for the school was provided by the Amundsen Foundation, the Delmas Foundation, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The Book Club of California was instrumental in helping us early on, and also the Zamorano Club of Los Angeles that you've heard so much about already. The Getty Trust, the William Andrews Clark Memorial Library, and the Department of Information Studies at UCLA. CalRBS was modeled initially on the highly successful Rare Book School at the University of Virginia, and in fact, to this day, Terry Bellinger continues as one of our advisory committee members. It was assumed that CalRBS would serve as an alternate source for students who were not able to attend courses at UVA. In fact, an analysis of enrollment figures from the first 5 years of CalRBS revealed even more starkly the difficulty that West Coast participants face in attending courses in the East. Between 2004 and 2010, only 3% of the Virginia Rare Book School students were from California. On the other hand, 79% of students attending California Rare Book School in those early years were residents of California. In recent years, that has changed, and California Rare Book School attracts participants from across the country. And I would have to say, anecdotally, that the students that come seem to select courses that they want to take, and we're finding more and more that students come to California Rare Book School that have been to the Rare Book School in Virginia, or vice versa. Students that come to California Rare Book School then go to Virginia, but it seems to be tied to the courses that they want to take. And so what are those courses? I've put a number of yellow sheets on the table for you to take a look at. This is our schedule just for 2016, but if you flip it over, you can see an alphabetical list of all the courses that we've offered since we started. And you may be wondering, well, how can I predict what's going to be offered next year since I can't come this year? I try to rotate courses, so there are certain courses that are taught every other year. I think Gary's course has the distinction of being the only course that has been taught virtually every year that the school has been in existence. So if you see something on the schedule for 2016, but for Gary's course, it probably won't be on the schedule for 2017, but it may come back in 2018. So much depends on interest and need for certain kinds of courses. I always try to offer rare book cataloging in alternate years with descriptive bibliography. So you see rare book catalog is being offered this year. We will offer descriptive bibliography in 2017. You can see from that schedule that all of the courses this year are being offered in August. We have 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks in Southern California, and then the third week here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have followed that pattern for about 5 or 6 years now. The first 5 or 6 years we were only in Southern California, and then we branched out to come up here. And it's been really wonderful to have the connection with the Book Club of California, because we always come here on Monday night when there's the normal Monday night gathering and have a speaker and have a reception. And it really adds to the community, the feeling of community that we're able to generate, even though we're scattered around the Bay Area, because we hold courses simultaneously here at the California Historical Society, at the Bancroft Library, at the Star East Asian Library, both on the UC campus, UC Berkeley campus, and this year for the first time we're offering a course at Mills College. So it's going to be a real test about whether or not we can bring everyone together at least 2 or 3 times during the week that everyone is involved in those courses. So let me tell you just a little bit more about the courses and the faculty. The faculty come from California, but also from across the country. We're very fortunate that the expert on artist books, Johanna Drucker, is on the faculty at UCLA, so she has taught an artist books course for us multiple times. This year, a new course, The Book as a Work of Art, is being taught by Peter Koch, who is a very important San Francisco printer that you may know of. Gerald Cloud, who is at Austin, Texas, at the Ransom Center, teaches descriptive bibliography for us now. And so he'll come, I hope, in 2017 to teach that again. He taught that here in the book club last year, 2015. We have a course called Donors and Libraries that I co-teach with Bill Barlow. Some of you may know Bill Barlow. He's an extraordinary collector of Baskerville and many, many other things. And he's also a CPA. So in this course, we combine my perspective as a librarian and his perspective as a CPA to help collectors, librarians, booksellers talk to one another about this whole process of bringing collections together with institutions. He and I are teaching that again this year in Los Angeles. We haven't taught it for a couple of years, so if you're interested, I hope you'll sign up. It's not a course that we offer every year. Another new course this year is History of the African American Book, 1773 to 1973. It's being taught by Randall Burkett and his colleague Gabriel from the Emory University Library. So you see, we bring faculty, we try to find the best faculty for the courses that we're offering, no matter where they come from. And we bring them either to Southern California or to San Francisco to teach their courses. Paul Shaw is from New York. He is teaching our History of Typography course. He's teaching it in Los Angeles this year. 2 years ago, he taught it here in San Francisco. So you see how we move things around. And then that course at Mills is a course called the Scholar's Studio, and this is being taught by Kathleen Walkup, who has been on the book arts faculty there for many, many years. She's an expert in her field, and so if you have any desire to learn to do letterpress printing, paper making, and binding all in the same week, that's the course for you. And they'll be at Mills College using the studios there that have been used for the book arts program there for many, many years. At any rate, that's just a very, sort of whet your appetite view of the courses that we're offering this year and have offered in the past at California Rare Book School. Now, I think we were charged to talk about the delights and also the dilemmas faced by collectors, and I want to just, I think I've told you the delights. The delights are to take one of these courses, and then you'll be hooked for life, not only on book collecting, but taking these courses. But the dilemmas, I would suggest that some of our courses really address dilemmas that collectors may have. Donors and Libraries addresses the dilemma of what you should be thinking about doing with your collection as you get to the point where you think you've completed it, or you have health problems and by reality that you're reaching sort of the end of your collecting time, and as Gary put it so well, you're looking forward to being in that big collection in the sky. Then Donors and Libraries can be very informative and helpful to help think about making certain kinds of decisions that you need to make. We offer 5 different courses currently that have to do with history of the book. So this is an opportunity to understand better where your collections fit in the overall picture of culture and historical development. And then descriptive bibliography is a wonderful course to know more about the physical nature of the materials that you have collected, and to be able to describe them better and to understand more fully what you're looking at if you're considering a really expensive acquisition. So I see that, and these are just 3 examples: descriptive bibliography, donors and libraries, and history of the book courses. These are just 3 examples of how we offer education to solve some of the dilemmas of book collectors. I think I mentioned at the outset that we have many collectors that take our courses, but I would love to see more. If California Rare Book School has dilemmas, one of the dilemmas is that we have not as many collectors as I would like to see in our courses. And what I'd like to do is charge you with sort of being the crowdsource people that would give me suggestions about how we might attract more collectors to our courses. The other dilemma that we have is that there are barriers to participation in California Rare Book School courses. Sometimes it's the course content. For some people, particularly graduate students, it's the cost. It might be the time, because each one of our courses is one full week from 9 in the morning till 5, and so if you're a working professional, you have to figure out how to take the time off to be able to do that. Distance can be a factor, and it's also an expense. So there are a number of barriers to participation. There are solutions to some of those barriers. One of the solutions is for us to offer as many scholarships as we can, and I'm happy to say that at this point in time, we're able to offer about 40 scholarships to students and participants that apply. This is based on need, but we look at it very, very carefully and select those recipients that we think will benefit the most from the scholarship. They're tuition scholarships, basically. The difficulty with this is there are never enough scholarships, and there are always more talented people that would like to come that don't have the funds to be able to attend than there are scholarships to give them. So that leads, of course, to one very important thing that we're doing more of, and that is fundraising. We've had annual fund drives for 3 years now, and done pretty well with those. And at this point, I guess I can still say we're in the quiet phase of an endowment campaign, a modest endowment campaign, but we believe that that will be a way to help the program move into the future. We're 11 years old at this point. We've passed the first decade. We have a T-shirt that says on the back of it, "Celebrate the Decade." So we look forward to the second decade, and we hope to have built an endowment by the time we reach the second decade for the school. At any rate, I hope that you will crowdsource with me and help me find ways to bring more collectors to our courses, and I hope to see you at California Rare Book School one of these times soon. Thank you.
I'm using slides. So good morning, everyone, and I wanted to add my thanks to Anne and to Jennifer and Randy for making this all happen. In keeping with the theme of dilemmas and delights, I'd like to share the dilemma that I face as a collector and share a couple of delights along the way. But first, I want to share something I think of as more of an irony than a dilemma. In order to do that, I want to go back to my origins of collecting, which Randy said was when I was 12. I played a lot of serious bridge and maybe a little less serious backgammon, and studied the games and learned that you could actually get better by reading books. And I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, and I would take the Shaker Rapid Transit downtown to bookstores that would be familiar to Rofant Club members. I would go to Kay's and Schroeder's and Publix, all sadly gone now. I bought books then at 2 for $1 maybe, and it was easy to get interested in the historical literature as well as the instructional literature. Isn't the general used bookstore how all of us got started in collecting? I hear the same story over and over as I talk with other collectors, and I'll share just one example as we lost a great collector within the past couple of months while he was visiting San Francisco. Paul Ruxon, a noted scholar of Johnson and Boswell, once told me how his collecting started. He was an associate attorney in a Cleveland law firm, billing 2,000 plus hours a year, and had his first vacation away from the firm. No telephone calls, no documents on his desk, and he was bored silly. He wandered into the general used bookstore near his vacation spot, picked up a copy of Life of Johnson, and from that moment, a passion was born. As Ken and Drew have talked about, the internet has killed the general bookshop. Amazon, ABE Books, Via Libre, and more. How are new collectors supposed to get started? How would I have gotten started? Or Paul? As Drew also discussed, though, the internet has made it an unparalleled time for the serious collector. And I agree, the transparency in pricing, location, inventory, we've never seen that before. So not a dilemma, but an irony. The internet has made it impossible to begin collecting, but it's made it the best time to be a collector. Let's turn to my dilemma. When family and career put my serious games playing on hold, I found that books offered a lot more time flexibility. As my collecting developed, I met other collectors of gaming literature, found specialist dealers, and came upon the gaming bibliographies that helped me understand the literature. My collection turned inevitably back in time to the 19th and then the 18th century, where I found the writings of Edmund Hoyle. He lived from 1672 to 1769 and was the first to write instructional books on card games and on backgammon. His first book, A Short Treatise on the Game of Whist, was published in 1742, and books with his name continue to appear until the present time. This is the first book ever written about the strategy of card play. Its importance is highlighted in the phrase in the long title, "Some rules whereby a beginner may, with due attention to them, attain to the playing it well." I acquired this rarity, this delight, more than 10 years ago, but there was an earlier acquisition that foreshadowed my obsession with Hoyle. In the early 1990s, a specialist dealer from London wrote me offering 6 different 18th century editions of Hoyle. Who remembers getting quotes in the mail? When I wrote back purchasing all 6, he wrote, "You don't intend to collect all the Hoyles, do you?" At the time, I would have said no, but since then, a different answer has emerged. This arts and crafts bookcase houses my Hoyle collection, some 200 copies of Hoyles from 1742 until the mid-19th century. After Hoyle's death, some editors improved or enlarged his book, adding new material and discussing new games. Others abridged his text or made pocket editions, so the books can actually be quite different from one another. Now, I won't say that my collection is complete. There are too many chapbooks and minor abridgments, which survive only in 1s and 2s. They're not particularly interesting or valuable, but they just don't show up on the market. Let's say then that my collection is substantially complete. Some data. Until the past few years, I was able to add a dozen or more Hoyles to my collection each year. 2015 brought only 7 editions, 2 of which were condition upgrades. So far in 2016, sadly only 2, about which more shortly. So I'm not finding many books to buy. Am I still a collector if I'm not buying? A happy collector? And that's my dilemma. What does a collector do when the collection nears completion? Or as Gary would say, what happens when you get Zamorano 64? Some collectors never complete a collection, perhaps because the subject is sufficiently broad or amorphous. I know of others who have completed a collection and then sold or donated it only to begin the same collection all again. Still others shift to new topics or move beyond books to other forms of collectibles. I've tried to get myself interested in other subjects. For example, Hoyle's first publisher was a chronically unsuccessful London bookseller named Francis Cogan. No one's ever put together a collection of Cogan imprints, which include political tracts, legal books, drama, plays, as well as the early Hoyles. I browsed the book sites and dealer catalogs for Cogan imprints, but found no joy in the search and quickly abandoned the idea. Now, I must confess that on a couple of occasions, I've strayed beyond books into collectibles, still staying within my subject area. I bought this late 18th century ladies' fan at an auction in London, and this close-up shows the title, The Games of Whist, Quadrille, Piquet, Lansquenet, and Quinze, Agreeable to the Improvements, on Hoyle. It would have been an aide-memoire for young ladies to learn the card games then favored by society, and the text is derived from Hoyle. This collectible is even stranger. The auction house described this textile as a handkerchief, but is in fact a cover for a card table with text visible to each of the 4 players. It can be dated to the late 18th or very early 19th century, both by the engraving technique and by the designs of the playing cards. The detail in the center gives the title, which begins, "The Laws of the Game of Whist." Although Hoyle is not mentioned, the laws and the odds are taken from his writing. These departures from printed books do not feel too radical to me. After all, both collectibles are engravings and have more text than image. I don't feel I've resorted to tin soldiers or some such. But quality Hoyle collectibles, though delightful, do not turn up often enough to resolve my dilemma. So what is the resolution? I ask myself, why do I collect Hoyle so obsessively? Long ago with bridge or backgammon books, the why was easy. I wanted to get better at the games. But why buy the 10th Hoyle, or the 20th, or the 200th? The answer for me is scholarship. My goal now is to have a reference collection of Hoyle for study and for writing. It's not what I started out to do, but it's where I've ended up. And it was a favorite article on book collecting that helped me understand that scholarship was my driver. I have never met Eric Holzenberg, director of the Grolier Club, but I feel that he knows me well. He gave an address to the Bibliographical Society of America in 2010 entitled "The Bibliophile as Bibliographer." The address was reprinted in PBSA, and Holzenberg described the path of the collector turned scholar. He could have been writing about me. He notes, "Collectors clearly remember the book or books that ignited their interest in their subjects, and when that purchase occurred, sometimes to the exact date. Certainly the first edition of Hoyle was one of my triggers." Holzenberg again. "The collectors tell of dutifully tracking down the standard bibliographies in their areas of interest in order to know what they had and what they didn't. They grew frustrated by gaps and inaccuracies in the bibliographies and began first to annotate these with notes of their own and then to create their own catalogs. All I can say is, been there, done that." Holzenberg goes on to describe a next step. Intent on beating or at least equaling scholars in their own game, these collectors set about teaching themselves descriptive bibliography and acquiring the necessary background in print and publishing history relevant to their subjects. Indeed, I enrolled in a class in descriptive bibliography at the Rare Book School in Charlottesville, not California, as Susan described. The class for me was a life changer. I learned how a book was made in the hand press era and how to describe it technically. Since then, I've taken other classes in bibliography and the history of the book trade and developed the confidence to begin research and writing. Back to Holzenberg. At this point in their careers, all of my fledgling collector scholars found themselves faced with a choice, whether to confine their work to their own books or to expand it to books, to copies elsewhere. Well, I've spent weeks at the Bodleian and British libraries. In the U.S., the Morgan, the Newberry, the Huntington, the Bancroft, the Sutro Library, the Library of Congress, plus numerous public and university libraries. The result of the research and study is this first article in a bibliographical journal, with more in preparation. Notice the journal cover with another Hoyle collectible, a scoring token for whist, with the motto, I quote Hoyle. I'm also working on a descriptive bibliography of editions of Hoyle, with nearly 200 entries now online, and I hope to have this all out in book form before too many years go by. Holzenberg concludes, there is of course a downside, the purely bibliophile complaint that the homegrown research collection means spending money on extra copies and boring later printings and other trash that only a bibliographer could love. And certainly the bulk of my collection is junk that only a bibliographer could love, and I do love it. But there's an upside to a collection that is substantially complete. When you do find something to add, it turns out to be a real delight. Consider my two 2016 purchases. My family vacationed in Italy this spring, and it was a trip more for wine and food and Tuscan hill towns than book shopping, but we did find one shop in Siena, and they had a gaming book. It consisted of 4 early 19th century Italian pamphlets bound together. One of them was a translation of the chapbook I mentioned earlier, Hoyle's Rules for Whist, compiled by the pseudonymous Bob Short. There seem to be 2 recorded copies in provincial libraries in Italy and none elsewhere. The second acquisition, a condition upgrade, will appeal to our guests from the Miniature Book Society. It is the only miniature edition of Hoyle, or near miniature at 3 1/8 inches. It was printed in Dundee, Scotland in 1806 for booksellers in London, Edinburgh, and Perth. I had one of 5 known copies when a 6th turned up in a binding that I couldn't resist. The book in mint condition had original goldenrod wrappers with a red leather spine. Mint because the book was housed in a slipcase. The slipcase has 2 marvelous engravings, one of couples dancing at a ball, the other of a foursome playing at whist. It's a rare and delightful survival and a very early example of a book published in a slipcase. Delightful. At an event here at the Book Club of California a few months ago, I described my dilemma to another member. What do I do when I can't find any more books? He answered, if you can't find any books in your field, it's because you don't know your field well enough. That reply was provocative in both senses of the word. For just a moment, his comment to use the first definition caused annoyance, anger, or another strong reaction. He challenged my expertise, saying that I don't know my field. Ha! But after a moment, his comment aroused interest, the second definition of provocative. I thought back to the Hoyles I'd added to my collection only because my research had revealed their importance. For example, I discovered an apparently duplicate 1752 Dublin edition of Hoyle, but with 8 additional pages of text. Advertisements from contemporary Irish newspapers revealed the reason. Another bookseller had put on a competing version and with more up-to-date text, and the first bookseller had to keep up. I've managed to find copies of that book both with and without the 8 extra pages. Only a bibliographer could love them, and I would not have sought them out but for the research. Similarly, I've spent a day in the past week studying a 1786 broadside with instructions for playing the game of Skittles, an outdoor game kind of lawn bowling. The text from the broadside was incorporated into Hoyle's games in 1808, and copies of the broadside, or perhaps its reprint, were advertised along with the Hoyle. Do I need a copy? First, I'll have to figure out more about its publishing history. Maybe I don't know my field well enough. So I'm a collector and not finding much to buy, but there are always more libraries to visit, more to study, and more to write. And as my friend suggests, perhaps more understanding will lead to more purchases.
What I'd like to do here over the next few minutes is just present a few questions of my own to the panel. It's been a really interesting listening to the different perspectives that you all bring to this topic of the book. So I'm going to just kick it off here with a question to Gary, and then Susan, if you could give me your perspective on the same question, I'd appreciate it as well. From the perspective offered by your various librarian roles in your careers, do you think that there's an increase or a decrease in the impact that books have on scholarship when they leave one of these dedicated collector scholars' hands, a person like David or Drew, for example, and enter a library? And I guess what I'm really getting at is do you feel like these books get more love, less love, or a different kind of love when they make that transition from collector to library?
In my opinion, it would be a different kind of love. And, due to the internet and, having facsimiles out there, Hothy Trust, what have you, I've been finding more and more that when I display something, we have a display, a little advertising at the Treasure State Library at the California State Capitol Museum, and have the Figueroa Manifesto on display, which published in 1835, and that's out there. It's been translated, so it's become more like a museum piece, and which is fine by me because again, I use it as a means of telling a story and getting people interested in books. But as far as scholars are concerned, I have found, just even through my own graduate work, what have you, most of my professors are very content to have the paperback version, or again to go online. But again, I still am very much in favor of the codex format, as I can barely move in my own home these days because of that. So and there's nothing like it. I mean, I love having piles of books around me. I find that I can do research better personally by having books around me and then having a computer screen. Actually, now I have 2 computer screens in front of me to do my research. So. Okay.
Well, I think I would second Gary in that I think when a collection comes into an institution, it receives a new kind of love and a new kind of use. This is one of the things that's so very important about that Donors and Libraries course that I talked about. We spend a lot of time talking with the participants in that course about needing to do research about where a collection might go in an institutional setting. So if a collector connects with an institution that's right for their collection, I think they can be assured that the collection will be loved and it will be used, but in new ways. And certainly the book as a physical object is come into its own as far as scholarship and scholars are concerned. That and the digital humanities that work digitally with material that has been scanned and is rare. Those 2 things in combination, studying the book as a physical object, understanding its cultural context and how it was created and so forth, and what we can learn from it, are so important. My current research has a lot to do with subscription publishing in Britain, and I found that I have to see the books. I have to see the same edition of a particular book that was probably printed in 250 copies. So I'm trying to seek out all those. But one of the things I'm looking for is the marginalia and the book plates, the information from previous owners that is in those books. And that's contributing to my scholarship. So there are new ways that book collections are being used in institutional settings, and so it's important that they find this new form of love.
Just want to add one more point. I'm doing a descriptive bibliography on the Klondike and Alaska gold rushes, and one frustration I've had in 2 institutions who will remain unnamed is it's been digitized, so therefore you cannot see the original. And I said, but I have to see it. And I said, your digital copy is lovely and everything, but it doesn't include everything. It doesn't include the bindings. The maps are, atrociously digitized, and on and on and on. So it's just been very, very frustrating not to be able to see the original. And I've gotten on my knees at one institution to please let me see these. And they said, well, we'll let you see a few, but only about half of what I wanted. So it's a new barrier that I've been encountering.
Do these people know who you are?
Yes, and I've said, one is, I'll say that it's right across the street from a building in Washington, D.C. with a big white dome. And that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Gary and Susan. Drew, I'd like to ask a question of you. And I'm asking this really sort of from your perspective as a psychiatrist here. So we have the possibility of sort of instant gratification of one's acquisitional aspirations in the internet age, which you talked a lot about. Do you think that dynamic has made collecting a more enjoyable process for the average bibliophile today, or is it sort of less enjoyable, to be a bibliophile today because you don't get the incredible joy that comes from the long search?
Well, it's a good question. Well, I think that the answer is that it depends on what kind of collector you are. If you are collecting something which is now instantaneously available, there are collectors, highly regarded collectors, whose collection can be reproduced in an hour on the internet, almost their whole collection, and they've even been mentioned. And I think that that kind of collecting is not very satisfying.
Can you put the microphone?
Oh, is it not working? Okay. So from my point of view, that kind of collecting would not be very satisfying. In other words, if you if you know what you want, say you have a dozen things and you buy them all in the next 20 minutes, and you spend a small amount of money on them or even a large amount, that's not very much fun. I think that the whole point of collecting is the chase. This is what I put the quote from Anna Freud at the top of the list that I handed out. The idea is the chase. It's the finding, it's the deciding, it's the capturing, it's the getting it. It's even the narcissistic pleasure of I've got it and you don't. So it's a very psychological event. So I think that people now have to collect something different, maybe more complex book collecting or more difficult. I think that the people who thought they were book collectors 30 years ago and were in those times and wouldn't be now because they could buy them all online immediately would not collect that. They would buy those, put them on a shelf, and move on to something more challenging. Part of the fun is the challenge.
Interesting. Thank you, Drew.
Could I add to something?
Oh, of course.
So I really miss the bookshop. Ken's got one, but there's something about the serendipity of walking into a place that you've never been to before, going through the shelves, touching a lot of books, finding something that you might not have considered, and you just don't feel that in the internet. And I would contrast the Italian book that I got in Siena and what that experience was like for me with a book that I bought Tuesday morning. I got up at 4:30 in the morning to bid online at an auction in France and won the book. And in terms of the feeling, I just got more joy, more juice, more whatever from happening across the book. We'll see.
I put together a collection of the first American vanity publisher called the Abbey Press in New York City. Worked on it for 35 years, just recently sold it to the University of Virginia. But about 90% of these books, published between 1900 and 1903, had an AP with a circle at the bottom of the spine. So years ago, I would go through the stacks at Acres of Books in Long Beach, California, which was this enormous barn, and just looking through the theology section or the fiction section or various, looking for these books and find, a little thin one and just having the enjoyment of the search. Now you put in a permanent want in like Abe Books, and you get a notice on you come to your business and they've sent you an email, and if you want it, you order it. It's just not the same experience.
And Ken, could I ask you a bookseller a question here? And by the way, I'll get to additional questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask the panel, could I ask you to write it on one of these and just hold the card up? A volunteer will bring it to me. It's just more for audio purposes, so I can repeat the question and everybody will be able to hear it. So, Ken, you've been a bookseller for a long time, and I'm always interested to sort of contemplate what areas of collecting used to be really hot among collectors and no longer are, And also, are you seeing any trends, any sort of maybe new areas of collecting that you hadn't expected that you're seeing among your customers?
Yeah, I think there have been some significant changes in collecting, really in the area of archival material, accumulations of personal papers, business papers, organizational papers, notebooks, unique materials for primary source research materials. Ephemera now is really strong. People have, I think, a much greater interest in little bits and pieces of paper from the past. Really unique copies, I think, has become a big area. You want something with interesting provenance, an annotated copy of a book with interesting marginalia notes. Bernard Rosenthal was mentioned. He's a person that kind of pushed that field by building a collection of annotated 16th century continental books, which went to the Beinecke Library. So there's a lot of new areas of interest. But it's all relates to, like, I think, unique and really great copies, interesting, special copies rather than just, the regular book. And the physical book itself, the binding for book illustration. In the past, I think there was a lot more collecting in areas like of general literature, putting together author collections, Western Americana, art books, and a lot of those areas now have kind of died away.
And David, I'd like to ask you a question here, and then at that point I'll offer up some of the questions from panelists. And my question for you is it lonely being a highly specialized collector? and I guess where I'm going with this is have you found other people who share your interest, or through your research and your publications, both on the web and physical publications, have you nurtured other collectors, or even found others who are interested in your areas or sort of ancillary areas?
So for sure. And one of the joys of the internet is each one of us is 3 standard deviations away from the mean in some aspect of our personality. And whatever aspect that is, you can find the other 25 people who are also 3 standard deviations away on the internet. So probably 15 years ago, a little bit longer, I got very interested in a French game that nobody had studied, or so I thought, and I put up a website about this game, and emails would slowly trickle in from Lyon and from Bordeaux and from Paris, and I now know the 24 people in the world who care about this game. Trick Track. It's a game played on a backgammon board. I bought a Trick Track book from Ken. So yes, I have found people care about Hoyle, people who care about games, people care about all this stuff, the other collectors, the other scholars, and it's a pretty small community, but it's findable thanks to the internet. So.
Terrific. Thank you, David. If you have any questions, I will now read them from the audience. So first question is from Bob Hopper of the Manuscript Society. And Bob says he loves donating items, but finds that IRS rules making the appraisal process daunting. Does anyone on the panel have any tips?
Take the Donors and Libraries course. It will help you a lot.
I think that's a sales pitch, but it's a good one. Another question here. Could any of you tell us what you're doing in your own endeavors to inspire young collectors as the future generation of bibliophiles?
Well, I'm maintaining an office, accessibility to anybody can come look at my inventory as long as it's not an open space. It's just have to call up and say, I'm interested in religion, or I'm interested in Western Americana, or I'm interested in whatever, and I'll set up some time for you to come by to take a look at what I have. But it's a tough one because I think that there's far fewer beginning collectors today than for me when I began. Somebody would come into my retail shop and see an Oz book and buy that one book, and then a month later come back and buy a second book. And slowly they became a collector of Oz books. And with all the shops gone, obviously it's much tougher for people to be exposed to the books.
At California Rare Book School, we've been very lucky because we've had very good supporters. The Zamorano Club has supported a scholarship for a number of years now for a young person to be able to come to California Rare Book School. Ken Carmiel Incorporated has also supported us that way, and William Reese Company has supported us that way. These kinds of scholarships for young people to be involved in California Rare Book School or Virginia Rare Book School are important to give them the background that they need to really become serious collectors.
So I suppose this is the moment to talk about book collecting contests. Eleanor and I sponsor one at Duke, and closer. Okay, Eleanor and I sponsor one at Duke, and Kim Brooker sponsors one at the University of Chicago. He actually won the one at Yale when he was an undergraduate, which is many decades ago. And Alice Schreier, who's at the Newberry Library in Chicago, who had been at the University of Chicago Library, has made a study of the book collecting contest and gave a lecture on it at the Grolier Club. So that's one thing I think people can do, is if they're affiliated with a university, they can support one of these. It's well worthwhile. And most of the great universities in this country have them. They sometimes change their names, but they've had them for a long time. And I think that brings out a certain kind of book collector who's willing to take the risk of exposing their incipient collections as undergraduates. And so we have undergraduate ones, we have a graduate one, and we're talking now about starting the very first postgraduate book collecting contest in this country, and we're hoping to get that going next year or the year after. And what that will do is include postdocs and medical residents and other people in universities who are no longer getting a degree. So they'll be excluded from the national book collecting contest, which is at the Library of Congress and supported by the Antiquarian Booksellers, but it will nonetheless give us a way of finding, we hope, those people who are a little further along the path, because actually I think mature book collecting probably does come out more in your late 20s for most people than it does at 18, which is not to say we haven't had some wonderful kids who are 18 or 20, but I think that we're going to look for the older group, and we hope that if it succeeds at Duke, that we could then get people to support the same idea in other universities. By the way, it's expanding around the world. Bill Zacks, who is an American, lives in Edinburgh, sponsors 4 contests at Scottish universities. Anthony Davis, who lives in London, who's known to many of us, sponsors 2, one at Oxford and one at the University of London. He attended both universities. So the idea is spreading around the world. There is some talk of there being one in Belgium or France next year, so it's on the way.
Yeah, just very briefly, I love to do show and tell, and I invite students over from the various universities in the Sacramento area. I wish we weren't so far away from the Bay Area in Los Angeles, but one of the great delights I've ever had in my life was a brilliant class of 4th graders, and they were studying the California Gold Rush. So I brought out a lot of rare books and things and manuscripts and overland guides, what have you, and the questions they asked were better than any adults I've ever had. And they just loved seeing the original materials, and I'm hoping out of that they will understand. It's one thing to see it on their little, electronic device, but to see something actually held by a gold seeker. That's one thing I try to convey. Or again, the value of a first edition is you're seeing it as Jack London would have seen it, and that really seems to spark an interest with these younger people. So,
And so I would echo that as well. One of my classmates at a rare book school class was Eric Johnson, who's a rare book librarian at Ohio State, and he is working closely with faculty all the time of how can I get your students into my library to look at my materials. I think back of my undergraduate courses where I took math and economics, history of economic thought, we were reading Adam Smith and all that. The college library had first editions of all that stuff in the library, but we were never even given the idea that maybe you'd go see how this was disseminated at the time, what the experience of going to the bookshop and looking at it. And I think kind of colleges and college libraries should do more and more of that.
Thank you, David. Well, we're reaching the end of the formal portion of this morning's symposium. And I would encourage you, once we adjourn here, to say hello to all of our wonderful panelists, and let's give them all a wonderful thank you.